Hey everybody, welcome back to the Climate Talks podcast. I'm Sam Orndorff, Geography PhD candidate, and I am coming to you today from a different location. As you can tell, I am not in the Digital Humanities Center podcast studio, but I'm outside here in the Chollas Canyon, which is a nice trail I like to run through, sort of in central San Diego. It's an undeveloped ravine. I'm surrounded by some beautiful coyote bush, baccharis, Artemisia californica, the delicious bubblegum smelling California sagebrush, and as you can probably hear, lots of birds. And I wanted to talk today about what I would consider to be the core causing factor of climate change, and that is the burning of fossil fuels. So there's really a lot at stake if we talk about fossil fuels. There's a lot at stake for humanity. There's a lot of assets and investments and enormous political economic power in the fossil fuels that have been dug up already and are in reserves, and the fossil fuels that are claimed below the ground. And we have to stop burning them in order to really address the worst contributions that humans make to changing the climate. We have to stop burning. We have to stop digging up from Earth's crust the coal, the oil, the gas, and we have to stop shipping it around, and we have to stop burning it. But the history of fossil fuels is kind of what I want to talk about. I think it really helps to provide context for why they're so important, why they have so many uses, and also why wars have been fought, countries invaded over them. And so this week, it was a pretty good week. I hope you had a good week. Monday was St. Patrick's Day, a day that I enjoy. It's one of the few days of the year where I really think about my ancestry and my heritage, being Irish American, Irish and German American. Not because I want to be sort of unique or special, make my whiteness have a flavor. I'm still a white guy. But, it's a day that I do reflect on. And I kind of had no choice, growing up. If I was home, my dad would wake me up with his Irish accent, telling me top of the morning. And he usually leaves me a voicemail in his Irish accent, or his version of it, calling me a laddie. He sent a text this year. I didn't go out. I don't usually go out for that day, but, Ireland was a country that was colonized. Still kind of is, depending how you look at it. It was colonized by Britain, the British Empire, for a good 800 years. And so Britain actually, it has a pretty big role in the quest for fossil fuels, and the British Empire, British imperialism, it's the reason I'm speaking to you in English today, but it's the reason that they were able to spread all over the world is because of fossil fuels and their ability to acquire them. The Feast of St. Patrick was on Monday, the 17th, and a few days before that, I was in the grocery store, and a guy who I'm going to go ahead and assume based on his red head was like me, is Irish American probably. Anyway, I was in the grocery store. This dude was next to me acting a little bit weird. He had a shopping cart. Looked like it was full of Red Bull. I didn't really see what else. Maybe some booze. I don't know. And I'm looking for bread. He's next to me with his cart acting weird. And he just kind of jets. He bolts out through the emergency exit. Obviously the alarm rings. He's got his shopping cart. He's gone. He's already fucked off. I'm just kind of staying there like, okay, I don't want to look like I don't want to look implicated. So I moved away. But it really just was kind of funny because it was clearly supplying the mixers and the libations for what I hope was a successful St. Patrick's celebration. And it kind of just got me thinking about taking and stealing, making off with certain things. It really got me thinking about that day and who I am and why do I do what I do? Why do I do this podcast? I think there's a lot that people can learn when they look into their heritage and their ancestry. I think there's a lot we can learn from stripping things down to their basics, looking at why things are where they are, to quote Ruth Wilson Gilmore, the great geographer. And so I'll try to come back to all of these and in time. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is building on that. As I mentioned, I've been sort of reconnecting with my Irish heritage and really thinking about what that means, and the fact that I come from people descended from County Cork and County Westmeath. A few years ago, my family we went on a trip to Ireland. Actually, that was an amazing time. Enabled by fossil fuels. Those long haul flights are enabled by fossil fuels. We'll get to that. And we, towards I think the end of the trip, we were in Dublin and went to St. Patrick's Cathedral, which is not what it sounds like. It is not not what I was expecting, at least. I was raised Roman Catholic, not really practicing anymore, but we get to the church, St. Patrick's Cathedral in Dublin, Ireland, and it didn't look or feel like what I knew of as a Roman Catholic a cathedral. It had a lot of Union Jacks hanging from the rafters. A lot of them were really old, historic. There were plaques up, sort of commemorating the soldiers lost, and I was like, okay, interesting. There were memorials and even notes written by people recently, sort of commemorating the lives lost to the soldiers who lost their lives in these different wars around the world. So I saw where are these wars they're talking about? Afghanistan, Burma or Myanmar, Egypt, Sudan. I think at that point I Googled on my phone, what's up with this? So I noticed it, and I came to find out it is an Anglican church. And what they're commemorating is all of the British Empire's wars around the world, and a lot of those were fought and died, including Irish foot soldiers who were implicated in that colonialism. Some of them were forced, or sort of had to make that difficult choice to join the British Empire, to join the British Army, sort of under duress. So all these wars throughout the 1800s, especially, I think there were some from the early 1900s, were being commemorated in this church. And I sort of connected the dots because Burma, Sudan, Egypt, these are all places that have oil. In fact, Burma was one of the first, if not the first, country that the British invaded, and this was in the mid-1800s, to get their oil. So around that region, they had a lot of oil. They were sort of experimenting what to do with it. And the steam-powered ships running on coal from the British Navy just popped on in and sort of took things over. And there's a really great book that details all that. It is Amitav Ghosh's The Great Derangement, Climate Change and the Unthinkable. That's a really excellent primer on how do we think about climate change? How does the West fail to think about climate change due to its lack of engagement in the natural world? So anyway, as I'm looking through this cathedral, I had read that book. I had been thinking about fossil fuels and the quest to do whatever it takes to get this fuel to power the navies, to electrify the homes, heat up the coal that would then go to the foundries and the refineries and to make metal and steel, to build cities, etc. And I thought that story really, it just really struck me for a lot of reasons having to do with fossil fuels. And so the fossil fuels that are really driving climate change, the three big ones, as I mentioned, are coal, oil, gas, liquid natural gas, and to a lesser extent, fracking and digging up bitumen, which is sort of that pasty, almost peanut butter-like consistency that basically becomes asphalt. That's bitumen. And let's start with coal. So coal was one of the first. People have been using all these things throughout human history, but starting in the Industrial Revolution, we figured out that coal is different from burning wood because it's got a really high energy density, and it does literally come from fossils in the Carboniferous period, in the Permian period as well. So like 200, 300 million years ago, after those big extensions, a lot of plant vegetation had all died, got compressed, and essentially just formed this really energy dense rock called coal. It's got other things besides carbon in it as well. But when you burn coal, it burns hot. It burns for a long time. You can use it to run a steamship. You can use it to run a train, a locomotive, and that's what they did originally. And then by the mid-1800s around the world, people were digging up oil, petroleum, and starting to figure out that, hey, this has tons of different uses, not just as a fuel for heat, to power transportation and transit. You can turn it into so many different things: synthetic solvents, plastics, all kinds of chemicals, right? And so the chemical industry, the plastics industry are very implicated in climate change, and they are very invested in the extraction of fossil fuels. And then in the 1850s, late 1850s, 1860s in the United States, especially in Pennsylvania and Ohio, just a huge oil boom, right? Coal had always been extracted in the Appalachian region where I'm from. It used to be they would go dig up coal in a mountain. Now, at some point, they realized that it was simpler, cheaper, quicker to just scrape off the entire top of the mountain to access that vein of coal beneath it, and that's called mountaintop coal removal, which has really devastated a lot of the Appalachian region. So coal came into use around the earliest phases of the Industrial Revolution. It burns hot. It's located in a lot of places in England. That gave them a leg up. In South Africa, in Australia, throughout the United States, in places like Montana, throughout the Appalachian region as well. And so that was actually really beneficial for that initial Industrial Revolution. And it helped power the locomotives and the steamships. You see the expansion of those industrializing economies and in the same swoop that you see the increased usage of fossil fuels. Now, there's a whole different equation when it comes to talking about transportation and getting around, because for most of human history, we were getting around on foot, on horseback, swimming, etc. And then by the World Wars, especially after World War II, there was a big investment in turning all of those industrial sort of mechanical machines of war into consumer products like cars. And so there was never really a genuine demand for cars. If you actually look at the history, people loved getting around on foot, being in close, dense, walkable urban areas and neighborhoods. And even in the rural countryside where, services like schools, hospitals, markets would be far away, people really just made do. Obviously, I'm not talking about people with different abilities, people who don't have the ability to walk. There's a whole history that's that we'll get to, I think, in a separate podcast when we talk about transportation and mobility and access. But the desire to get every single person in the industrialized world into a car has been catastrophic. And that is because it burns fossil fuels, and a lot of those trips are not efficient. They are very close. They should be made on foot, if possible, or in a bike, or even carpooling. Less than 10% of Americans carpool. The average car trip in the United States, even though most cars have 4 seats, is about 1.1 passengers. And the other thing is that when we talk about transportation and our transportation system as this massive contributor to climate change, especially in North America, there's a tendency to say, well, I have to drive a car. People have pretty low patience for public transit. Understandably, it's not very good. As I said, we'll get into that in a separate podcast. But I think there's a convenient excuse, even for activists, even for people in the environmental field. People who are pro-environment are still pretty likely to drive a personal vehicle, not really worry about how efficient it is, and burn that fuel to save that time. And so that's a huge problem because the majority of the United States emissions come from transportation. About 60% of the emissions from the transportation sector comes from personal vehicles, not from industry, not from trucks, not from big corporations. That's from just regular average people driving around in their cars. And I bet you can notice it if you ever stand on a busy street, if you can bear the fumes and the sound and the unpleasantness of being next to a busy street on foot. Look at how many cars have just one person in them. Even big minivans, right? They're often, they'll hit that average, that 1.1 person average. That's from Susan Handy's book, by the way, called Shifting Gears. So there's a lot of different aspects to climate change where we have this convenient excuse to say, I'm only one person, what can I do? Well, there's a lot you can do. If there's any way you could carpool, take public transit, take a bus, take a bike, take a scooter, take a unicycle, whatever it takes, that makes a huge contribution. And the United States burns about 20% of the world's petroleum. So most of the petroleum or the oil that is extracted tends to go towards transportation, like diesel, airlines, which we'll get to, and by and large just personal vehicles. And so we are around 2% of the world's population. We are burning 20% of the world's petroleum. And we are really tied to it. We've built our communities in ways that make it miserable to get around if you don't have a car in general. There's a huge divestment from public transit. People are having declining health because they're not really moving their bodies to get around in the world if they're able to. And so that's a major problem. And we have to talk more about that. That's a critical issue that it's so wrapped up in our daily lives. I think I would like to spend a whole podcast talking about how dreadful cars are for the environment and why I hate them. I mean, I own one. I'm a hypocrite, but that bears its own discussion. So for right now, I just wanted to say that the oil that we've invaded different countries to get in Iraq, in other places, it mostly serves our transportation systems, but it also it's wrapped up in the military industrial complex because those big ships are also running on oil. And they are there in order to secure those oil extraction systems and that infrastructure in large part. Not only that, not exclusively that, but that's a big part of it. Now, airlines. Okay, flying in a plane is a huge privilege. Just like owning a car, probably about 1 in 8 people globally own a car, so that's important to keep in perspective. And an even way smaller amount of that ever get a chance to fly in a plane. So, we have this idea within the United States and our social system and our economic structure that's built on a lot of inequality. We have this notion that you can have a car and take regular trips in a plane and you're still working class. Globally, though, you're in the elite. You're in the top 5% of the world. Most people don't get a chance to do that. And so the wealthy of the world contribute far more and consume far more. They contribute far more to climate change, and they consume far more resources than most people in the world. The average person in the world doesn't do that. The good side of airlines is that you can go far, right? You can experience another culture, which is amazing. I mean, that's unlocks parts of your brain that you might not even know existed. You can learn a new language. Hopefully you can have experiences that change you for the better if you are able to get on a plane and go somewhere far away. And in the grand scheme, airlines are only contributing about 1.5-ish, as far as I know, 1.5% to the overall CO2 emissions. We don't have a way to electrify them, to have an airplane that is not running on jet fuel. There's a lot of research into that, but such a renewable airline does not exist yet. So that's airlines. Talked about the transportation, talked about the ties to militarism and imperialism. And if you look at the climate justice literature, especially in geography, we're really attuned to the way that there's inequalities that enable us in the global north to move around how we want to have electricity all the time. And those are what got us into the scenario where we're burning tons and tons of fuel. And those are the things that are not being addressed in a lot of mainstream climate policy. At least not at the national level. At the international level, there's a more of a robust discussion around these countries that have contributed far less to climate change need ways of coping, of adapting, and they're not the ones who should be worrying about mitigating the pollution that they put out there. So there's mitigation, there's adaptation to the changes that are for sure to come and already have struck in those major weather events. And then there's this idea of resilience, which is how do communities bounce back once they've been struck by some sort of climate catastrophe. The other really important aspect of fossil fuels as drivers of climate change, besides transportation, which is the main contributor to our overall CO2 pollution in the United States, is electricity. We generate electricity by and large, about 80% of the electricity generated here to power our homes, to give us heat in the winter and to give us AC in the summer. 80% of that is coming from fossil fuels. And that includes mostly burning coal. So about 40% within that is generated from burning coal. It burns hot. You burn it over a giant vat of water. The water bubbles up and boils into steam, and that steam is above a turbine that spins. All electricity generation is really, even including nuclear, which is crazy, all of it is all just boiling water and making steam to turn a turbine, which is the same way that renewables work as well. So hydroelectric dams do the same thing. And when we talk about hydroelectric dams, if you're curious about the ecological issues with those, I wrote my thesis about that, about a hydroelectric dam that was protested by indigenous Nayeri people in western Mexico, and that dam was never built. So there was a big discussion down there, like 5 or 6 years ago, about what are the issues with generating power through a hydroelectric dam. And that's free online if you look up my name and my thesis. So 80% of the electricity that we're generating comes from burning fossil fuels, mostly coal, but also oil and gas. Gas is a really recent one that's really taken off. Coal's the worst. Coal, if out of those three fossil fuels, oil, gas, and coal, coal has the most nasty shit in it that is really bad for the air. It's really bad for pollution, for smog. It lets out sulfur dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas besides CO2. That famous London smog that happened in the mid-50s was from people burning coal, and like tens of thousands of people died just from that one event. And so there's been a shift away in the global north from coal, but China still burns a lot of coal. They also have massively invested in renewables. South Africa has invested a lot in coal. Even advanced economies like Japan are still burning coal and still putting on new coal-burning power plants into their electricity grid. So how we're powering our homes is huge when it comes to climate change, because most of that energy is coming from fossil fuels. And then if we're talking about other ways of getting power, which are better, like solar panels are good, wind farms, wind turbines are good. Nuclear is super controversial. We might do our own episode about that. Burning biomass is one, which is oftentimes a fancy name for going into a forest and cutting down trees and then burning it for energy. What else you got? You got geothermal, other things like that. And so these have been around for a while, but we are only now starting to get to a point where they're cheap. They're cheaper in some cases, in some places, to invest in than fossil fuels. Now, they're still industrial, right? They are still giant pieces, hulking pieces of metal and minerals. They have all kinds of rare earth minerals like cobalt, cadmium, molybdenum, tungsten, lithium, etc. Those are all needed to build renewable infrastructure as well. But once you get them online, even though it's an industrial process to set up those wind turbines, to lay out those solar panels, that's an industrial process. Once they're online, they're not going to be contributing much, if any, pollution. So that's great, and we should keep investing in that. But the problem is, it's intensely political. It's part of this idiotic culture wars where the far right wing that's been taking over wants to disinvest in those, and they want to double down on fossil fuels. So they have this new executive order under the guy who's the president, and they call it Unleashing America's Energy, and they want energy independence. So that's sort of their buzzword or their dog whistle word to say, we're going to use every available platform and public space and federal land to pump out coal, oil, and gas. And as I've said on this podcast, like there's no leash. You're not unleashing anything. Biden sort of barely slowed down the extraction of fossil fuels on public lands. Obama was very in favor of natural gas, which is kind of a lateral move. I mean, it's still a fossil fuel. It has less of those nasty things that I mentioned compared to coal, but it's still a fossil fuel. And Canada's doing the same thing. It's not a left-right thing. It's not a U.S. only thing. Like every industrialized country is having major issues with this. So that's something you really got to think about. And I do want to talk about fracking. Fracking is like the fossil fuel extraction on crack. If fossil fuel is coke, fracking is crack cocaine, because it is like going into those old disused oil wells and those old coal seams, pumping in water into it, fracturing the rock, and allowing that gas to escape. When that gas escapes, it can cause minor earthquakes. It can really, really devastate and fuck up the water supply and groundwater. That's proven. I don't give a shit what some compromised scientists, even in my field, will say. Fracking is very harmful to groundwater. It is a massive contributor to methane, and methane is about 80 times more damaging in the atmosphere than CO2. Now, the good thing is methane sort of dissipates and clears up once you stop releasing it, but we keep fracking. We keep doing it. And all of these old former fossil fuel sites, we keep on fracking. And it's an absolute disaster, and it has to stop. Maybe we should do our own episode about that. But yeah, that's kind of all I wanted to say about fossil fuels. We're going to be digging into these as we go. And I just want to say, like, I've had a lot of sleepless nights. You know, I'm still wrapping up my dissertation work, so that's stressful. But what's going on in the world right now is really alarming. A few weeks ago, you had two people with significant political power and influence and visibility doing the Sieg Heil. They did the Heil Hitler move in public. Steve Bannon and Elon Musk both did that. And there wasn't really much critique. I mean, I thought it was outrageous. I thought it was disgusting and despicable. and they're sort of normalizing or dabbling in fascism and the symbols of it. And I don't know if I'm being alarmist, but I do know if you look at their policy, you look at their actions, their activities, the things they support, the things they say, it closely resembles the activities of fascist parties in the past. And so what have fascists done? Well, they have a playbook, right? Including in Italy and in Japan, we had this global war to fight fascism, which my family members were involved in. They invest heavily in fossil fuels. They have a sort of combination of state and corporate power. They have one-party rule. They have extreme repression against minorities who are treated as villains, even though they actually lack power in the system. They have this hyper-masculine ideal that sees no room for any kind of other gender expression. It's anti-woman, it's anti-trans, it's sort of eugenicist. And those people are on top right now. So when I talk on this podcast about the threat of fascist dictatorship, I'm not taking that lightly, and I'm not throwing that out there without having done any research. And it sort of speaks to who I am and what my values are, because there's a strong connection between fossil fuels and oppression, and fossil fuels and the quest for global domination. But a better world is possible. We don't have to do things this way. We don't have to burn fossil fuels. And we don't have to let those people control the narrative. There's a lot in this world that gives me hope. There's a lot that gives me peace, including this canyon where I'm talking to you from. And so that's going to be it for today. Hopefully this is a day where you get to do something that's just for you. Do something that is self-care, that doesn't burn fuel. Don't ride a jet ski. Take a canoe. Don't go rev your engine in a car. Take a train, okay? And as always, if you have a question for me, I got a really good question earlier, and there's so much there that I really wanted to get to, but I'll get to that once I get to the studio next week. But if you have a question and you'd like to have a discussion with the Climate Talks podcast, you can send us an email at climatetalksquestion@gmail.com. That's it for this one. Take care.